Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where you happen to be. Hi, I'm Andrew Hill. I'll be your neuroscientist for the evening for our Neurofeedback and Chill live stream. Looks like my monitor is catching the edge of my camera. There we go. You can see some little wires. That's appropriate, right? Some little wires sticking up in the frame. Hi, everyone who's showing up early. Thanks for showing up. How you guys doing tonight? Sup, Radar Ashwood, sup to yourself. How are things? Well, I hope everyone's having a good day and you're taking good care of your brains. You know, I usually do a specific biohacking topic on these neurofeedback and chill nights, but I did not prepare one, so I thought I would hang out and ask questions, maybe do a multi-part neurofeedback protocol and explain some of my ideas around how I build it. At the very least, unless you guys had questions and wanted to ask me anything, then I'll answer those questions instead. Thanks, Radar, for the confirmation of audio and visual performance. It's reassuring to know that I'm not talking into the void. Shouting into the void is tough, you know. Doesn't do any good. So let's set up a neurofeedback protocol. For those of you who are watching this video live or later and you're new to this, I do a live stream every week where I talk about neurofeedback a little bit, typically some other brain topic as well, often regarding ADHD or aging or peak performance or brain injury or something. And my real goal with this is to help educate you to become your own experts around whatever neuro topic you have. So I use neurofeedback a lot, and I thought I would just do this every week and demystify neurofeedback, but I'm also here to answer other questions. So live or later, please lay them on me. Radar's asking, so you can totally fire away questions whenever you like, and I'm gonna go set myself up a neurofeedback session. And as I do that, I will, here, let's ignore the fact that I'm looking the wrong direction. Turn off the show title, there we go. So yeah, please feel free to lay out to fire away questions, Radar, while I set up a session. I'm gonna do a triple tonight, I think, which is something I haven't done in a while, at least on camera. And I have a certain triple protocol that I like to do, which mixes a left side beta reward on the left precentral gyrus, an area we call C3 in neurofeedback or EEG. And then on the right-hand side, we would do SMR training for executive function, and the vertex for a mix of executive function and sleep. So C3, C4, and CZ, left, right, and center. And there's a particular variant of it I'm going to do tonight. Let's call it, do I have any custom session plans? Let's see if there's anything preloaded in this machine. There is not. So that means a manual setup. Yes, default. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to do C4A2 for the second one, so that's fine. 4 to 7, that's fine. And we'll do that for, let's just do it for 6 minutes because I'm going to do a couple SMRs. And then I'll do the setup after that. So let me insert after. We'll do a run on that block. So we'll do 6 minutes there. And the first block becomes a setup. The first thing I do is change the thresholds. Whoops, that's the run mode. Cancel. Auto goal settings. 25, 65, and 15 are what I use. And what this means is this is the percentage compared to the person's moment-to-moment average. So if you're rewarding a brainwave or any parameter, you're watching that parameter as it changes in semi-real time in the person's brain. And when it changes briefly, usually on its own, in the right direction, so to speak, you would applaud that by making some audio and visual happen. That's the basis of most neurofeedback. But to make learning happen, to encourage an adaptive process within the brain, most of the software will adjust and be some range away from where the brain is to encourage the brain trending in a certain direction. And so I'm setting up how far away the thresholds are, and then how often it will update, every 30 seconds in this case. All right. So that is a, did I set this up wrong? I did not. This is CZ. CZA1, we'll do 4 to 7, inhibit. So I could have set this up earlier. So what I'm doing is setting up a slow brainwave called theta to measure that when that one goes down, it lets the brainwave, the game run. And when a low frequency beta called sensory motor rhythm, or SMR, goes up, that one will allow the game to play. And theta gets in the way of more voluntary control and fine-grained control on tissues. And low beta, or SMR, is often very good for both concentration, sleep, and relaxation. So I'm doing a couple different variants here of SMR training that I'll explain once the screen's up and running. And let me add a C3, a left side beta training as well, and then I'll answer some questions. Let's do a setup of C3. And again, auto goals of 25, 65, 15 is what I use. If you are one of our peak brain clients, then you generally don't have to do this much setup because we pre-configure. But in a who shaves the barber moment, I have not set my own protocols up ahead of time, so I have to manually configure them all. Thankfully, I'm unlikely to make mistakes when doing manual config. The reason we pre-configure them all is because there's lots of little fiddly bits to set up. And if you do it wrong, it doesn't work the same way. And so let's do 12 minutes at C3. No, we'll do 9 minutes. 9 minutes of C3. Okay, so C3A1, right? C3 minus A1. Yep. And then we have C4 minus A2. I'll explain that as we get to it. And then we'll have a CZ minus A1. Looking pretty good. All right, let me answer some questions while I put some electrodes on. So Radar's asking, he sees, or actually I'm not sure. Radar sees, I really like recommending FC minus PZ with a reward of around 7 to 10 hertz. Why do I like that protocol so much, and what is it useful for? So yeah, that's one of the singlet protocols where you're training essentially FC minus PZ trains, in theory, the anterior cingulate in the front and the posterior cingulate in the back. And you'll often find that they get kind of stuck together, where the front is making too much beta or too much theta, and the alpha is either average or low. And so the idea there is that the beta waves are kind of revving the tissue, and the theta is allowing things to happen, and the alpha is not there to kind of kick things back into neutral. So depending on the person's brain, you would inhibit a fast beta frequency or a theta frequency or both. And then you would look at the alpha range that they maybe are either have low amounts in absolute power, or you'll see sometimes that they'll have specific frequency ranges in relative power that drop out compared to the theta and the beta. And then that would be the range to reward. You will also see sometimes there's much more of an activation at PZ than there is at FC. At that point, I would probably not do FC minus PZ initially, but I would do PZ minus A1 first. Because a lot of the big, strongest drivers of really intense anxiety do come from PZ more than FC. FC is more obsessive, more perseverative when it's stuck. Songs in your head, biting your nails, OCD things. PZ is more fearfulness, threat sensitivity, rumination, trauma response, that kind of thing. It's not just that. It's not only those things, of course, but it is involved with those phenomena. So you'll find PZ is often a little more central to the phenomena. And so, thinking of PZ as a piece to go after, the FC minus PZ protocol, you would adjust your bands based on what it is you are seeing in the person's brain and their experience. So there's my thought process in that in that protocol selection. Hey Ryan, do I ever have people that even after doing a bunch of sessions don't see any progress in QEEG in sites or targeting, or even have results go in the opposite direction you're looking for? Almost never, I don't think. I mean, no. If we're training the brain, then the brain moves on the data sets. I mean, the goal is to create large experiential change. And when you create experiential change, you also get data set changes. But if you train to the data itself, without adjusting based on the person's experience, you can get the data to change without the person experiencing a lot of change. And I would say every so often, maybe one person in 1,000, I will do what I think is really good neurofeedback and train and iterate, and actually we'll see changes in the EEG, but we won't get the changes the person is looking for. It's rare. Usually you have to sort of balance the two, the experience and the brain, and you can kind of get to what they need almost always. But it's rare. What was the question? How'd you phrase it? Yeah, I've never had an EEG move in the other direction, really. I mean, you have EEG be variable. So, if you're training down theta, you can have theta climb, but it's really probably would have been even higher without the training usually. You also can have exhaustion or fatigue states throw off a QEEG and make things look hard to understand or a little bit counterintuitive. You will see, Ryan, look at the last page in those shorter data sets, the ratios, and you'll see that the ratio features, the patterns you'll see in a ratio, those don't move in a linear direction necessarily because the aspects of the ratio, the numerator and the denominator, they're not moving together necessarily. So you'll occasionally see things in ratios move up and move backwards. And that's useful because that shows you in some ways what's driving a deeper phenomena that might be a little harder to see in absolute power. If theta and beta moving together in someone's brain as they wake up from like a lot of brain fog, but let's say theta is coming up a little too fast, or they have tons of slow brain waves. And so as they come up, the thetas and the deltas are super strong, but the beta is not as strong. You'll suddenly see just how much that theta is in the way on a ratio page because it's moving up faster, let's say, or the beta is moving up less quickly, to be more accurate. So I'm not sure if that made sense. Let me know if you want me to unpack that a little bit more for you. So yeah, Ryan, every so often I do see that. I think it's my thought process there is that there's usually some reason for it. If you're seeing something move suddenly, another piece about brain mapping or QEEG is that things don't move very quickly. So things usually move in a predictable direction over time in a way that makes sense. And if there's some other movement, some other pattern jumping out, there's got to be a reason for it. And if you dig around in history and change of habits and experience, you can usually see why. I would say the other piece there is that sometimes there's a time course to people's suffering, especially with things like a concussion or maybe COVID. You'll see this time course phenomena over months as just part of the recovery. In a significant concussion, people recover for up to a couple of years after their initial concussion, and they will have a blooming effect show up. So if it's a mild to moderate concussion, you can feel horrible, and the EEG, the X-ray, the fMRI, nothing shows very much. If you did all the imaging, you wouldn't get very, very much if you did it right after the concussion. But if you do it a month later or 2 months later, you can suddenly see all the inflammatory response showing up at a much higher level. So concussions and things like that will bloom and then drop away over a couple of years on time course. The same is true of COVID. Right after getting over COVID, people feel really crappy, but you don't see the really, really acute brain fog typically right after. When you see it is typically 1 or 2 or 3 months later, being the most obvious in the EEG. So disease process or the course of things you're recovering from can push the brain in certain directions, but I usually would be very surprised to see things sort of move in the wrong direction when we would look at brain data. Also, another thing to think about is that the montage and the filtering make a big difference in what you're looking at. So sometimes if you're looking at old data or data prepared by somebody else, then the filtering characteristics or how heavily they clean the data and didn't let noise through, or what montage they used, a slightly different montage. Those things can really make data look different in a QEEG. If you look at the raw traces, you can see it's somewhat similar data as well. So I encourage you just to dig deeper when you see a pattern that you've been training that doesn't make sense, because there's probably some, if not a reason, a rationale or a model that you can use to explain what's going on. And then if you have a model of what's happening in the brain, you can test it by doing neurofeedback or other interventions. Hey, Joe Barr. Nice to see you. Do best frequency tones produce measurable shifts in brain activity? EEG, creating frequency differences in low beta range, like 13 hertz to help with focus. So no, the short answer is no. The evoked frequency following response with audio tones, be it binaural beats or very similar things like that, the human brain does not pick up the tone or the beat. So if you played 100 hertz in one ear and 110 hertz in the other ear, you're not going to pick up a 10 hertz alpha wave in the brain. It does not work. Those audio listening things do not do what they say on the tin. The beta wave listening tapes and the alpha wave, they do not do that. They are a particular type of meditation, basically, where you can anchor your attention to those things. So there's some of that. And then if I didn't understand your question, then you were probably asking something akin to, does the nature of the reward beep matter in neurofeedback? Does it matter if it's a high beep or a low beep? And the short answer there is no. The brain doesn't care what the information is, as long as it gets the applause sometimes and doesn't get it other times. It won't care what the flavor of the applause is. So whichever way I misinterpreted your question, hopefully there's an answer there for you. Radar is asking, are there any benefits to alpha theta if you're not really a trauma victim? I would say there's huge benefits to alpha theta for many people. Yeah. In fact, I might say that alpha theta is not a great idea if you have a lot of active trauma response stuff, a lot of strong anxiety. Alpha theta would probably be contraindicated for a while until you develop some resilience. At least that's the way that I work. I don't think it's a good idea to drop dynamite in the kiddie pool and have crap fly everywhere. And alpha theta can do that. I'm untangling some wires here. There we go. I think it's better to work on resilience, stress, sleep, and attention, the three legs of the stool of our regulation really powerfully so that you can handle being thrown off if it happens. But generally, alpha theta I like to do gently enough that you don't create huge sort of trauma release type phenomena. I mean, you can get that. I would argue that most people that do trauma-informed therapy and neurofeedback these days don't use alpha theta for neurofeedback. They instead use other things. Maybe half of them will be using infra-slow or infra-low these days, and the other half will be using sort of Seaburn-Fisher style training of the Inian often. What used to be, I think, FPO2 was often done by Seaburn, and the article on her website talks about FPO2. I believe a lot of those protocols she's using have moved back to IZ under the Inian. So those are a similar place as many alpha theta protocols are done at OZ, at PZ, at POZ, etc. But I think it's a different protocol class, and it feels very, very different than alpha theta. So back to your actual question, is there any benefit? Yeah, sure. Alpha theta has profound impacts on things like creativity, on flow state access, on, I believe, intelligence, on probably T cells, on, let's see, what else? Flow states. Also drinking. If you crave alcohol or have trouble not drinking, alpha theta has a really lovely ability to sort of re-educate your natural ability to downshift without requiring alcohol. So alpha theta is a pretty lovely protocol when you have need for it. Now, if you have lots of anxiety, it's probably a bad idea because it's going to make you very aware of your emotions for a while, for a day or so. Also, alpha theta can make us feel kind of stoned, kind of loopy, and that's something that people find often a little disconcerting, especially if they're really activated. So you want to be careful just layering it on people. Let's see. I think those are all the questions. Thanks for all the questions, guys. I really appreciate it. Let me put some wires on my head. We got some 1020 paste right here. And I'm going to take a wire, single wire. I'm going to paste up a location on my head. I can't even see. I'm looking at a small screen. Let me change screens. Actually, I can't. Let me just do this by touch. That's about right. So Gerbar is asking, is the frequency following response a real phenomenon then? No, it's not. Not in human brains for auditory stimuli. There's some evidence that general brains, mammal brains, do have a frequency following response in some cells to red light in the 40 hertz range, but a flicker, a visual flicker. So there's visual entrainment that is frequency following as well. Like you can do a steady state visual evoked potential, and that'll create if you flash a little blip on the screen, a dot in the screen, you'll get a little bit of the brain reacting in rhythm to that. But that's not the same thing as the frequency following response people talk about in binaural beats. As far as we know, that doesn't actually do anything, and there's lots of studies showing. There's lots of people who fail to show things in studies. So no, the frequency following response has been demonstrated in a couple of lower animals, but as far as I know, there's been zero evidence finding it in humans, and there's been evidence against it when people go looking for it. So I got a reference on that side, got a ground wire on the other side. Radar's asking, what site or sites do I train alpha theta at? You've seen lots of different answers to this question based on the practitioner. Well, I mean, in general, it's the back of the brain. You know, the outside world's the back of the brain, and even though it's an internal awareness kind of protocol, it's not a very cognitive, very, very like heady self protocol. It doesn't put you in the cognitive space very strongly. So back of the brain, alpha theta in the front of the brain is a bad idea. That's essentially what tag sync can do for some people, which is a bad idea. But I would say generally the midline, and the classic location from the literature is PZ. So you don't have to, worry about what providers say. What the literature has used historically is PZ. You'll find that some literature, some providers move to OZ, and then some people split the difference and do POZ. You'll also find that a lot of people, especially those trained by the Othmers, will do P3A1 and P4 minus A2 in a contingent dual. And things like 40 Years of Zen, I believe they use similar sites, but in a synchrony, alpha synchrony training. So you'll have all of these different variants, and they all have their uses, is my answer. And I actually use all of them. I also use O1 minus A1 every so often, or OZ minus A1. I use PZ minus A1. I'll do PZ minus linked ears. I'll do OZ minus linked ears. I'll do O1 minus A1 and O2 minus A2 in an alpha synchrony. Or I'll do a sweep of P3 minus A1 and P4 minus A2, and then move down to the POs and move down to the Os and sweep through all those in 2-channel sweeps, depending on the person. And that's the important thing. That last statement, depending on the person. Not every person's going to tolerate or benefit from every flavor of alpha theta. And you can often tell. You can look at their brain and tell which variant of alpha theta is likely to produce the most benefit based on, is there low theta in certain areas? Do you have coherence issues between those areas? Do you have hotspots of beta in those areas? So again, if you do, you may have to work on other things first, but you can often see what variant of alpha theta in terms of a montage is going to be the most enjoyable just from their QEEG. Also, I would say to maybe narrow down the perspective from everywhere on the back of the head. PZ, you get a little more emotional access. As you go down to OZ, it turns more visual. And splitting the difference to POZ, you get both the emotional and the visual. So you can think of that, right? OZ and O1 and O2 are primary occipital cortex, V1. So PZ is more about the cingulate. So between them is sort of tapping into actually aspects of both. Let's see. Ryan's asking, what are some of my best favorite examples of results achieved in high performance athletes using neurofeedback just to maximize performance? That's a great question. Let me start my session and then I will get into your answers, Ryan. I'm going to have general answers, not specific ones for you. All fair warning. Let's do formation today. And we got a signal going. You can see at the top of the screen. Takes a couple seconds to start real signals. Seems like I have a little noisy signal. Why is that? Maybe one of my ear clips is weak. Yep, that's what it was. I was picking up 60 hertz noise apparently. Now it's better. Not that stable. There we go. I'm going to scale it to 50, which will make it a little bit small to see, but it's also going to yank the offset filter so that it stays smaller. So let's do F9. And then plus to scale it to 50. There we go. So the reason I'm scaling it up to 50 microvolts for the trace is because it just makes it smaller. And on Eager, when you go up in scale, you also apply to the trace, to the visual, a more aggressive high pass filter. And so what that means is the bottom edge of the high pass moves up and you filter out half a hertz, 1 hertz, 2 hertz as you go up in scale on the display. And that just has the benefit of dragging an unstable signal a bit back into range. It can make it hard to see the quality of the signal, but I know it's pretty good quality here. All right, now let me auto scale all the bands, just in case something needs to be offset. There we go. Nothing really scaled, and auto threshold. There we go. Now I'm going to hit F5 to begin. F5 to begin. There we go. All right, you hear that beep? That's my brain getting applause in theory. So yeah, what's happening now is we are simply, turn that down a little bit. So I'm sitting here training my brain. If you're new to neurofeedback, this is neurofeedback. Measuring a bunch of brain waves. Let me move my head to cover that flashing yellow thing. There we go. So I'm simply watching, the computer's watching the raw signal at the top of the screen and measuring out, oh, it's 2 to 8? How'd that happen? Let me fix that. Why does it say 2 to 8? So the frequencies are all messed up in this setting. They didn't get saved, so I'm just going to do it manually. Make it 4 to 7 and make it 14 and a half is, let me get 15 actually, and then 24 to 36. So apparently my my settings weren't captured. Now they are. F11. So for those of you who use Eager, what I just did was change the frequencies in a protocol segment on the fly without stopping Eager. You can do that. What you do is you highlight the band you're working on and use the control button on the keyboard with a pair of either up and down arrows or left and right arrows, and it moves either the whole range or one end of the range, depending. So it's a way to quickly catch up if you made a mistake like I just did. So Ryan, to answer your question about high performers, I have a lot of extremely high performers, some of the highest performing people in the world, and that's true across professions. So I have athletes, a lot of them. Turn this down a little bit further. I've got executives that are, billionaire type titans of industry. I have people that are, incredible high achievers in the caring fields who run emergency departments in hospitals and academic departments in universities. I've got a lot of musicians who perform at a very high level in front of crowds of hundreds of thousands. I have actors who are on all your favorite TV shows. And the reason I'm lumping all these people together is because all of them perform smoothly in their chosen way of skill or art. They all perform smoothly under high intensity. And that's true of the Formula F1 drivers, the football, the European football. It's true of the actors. It's true of the musicians. The people that perform exceptionally high, they can work at a high level for their brain with resilience. They can sit down and do a project or do a show or do a match or a meet or whatever it is, or a meeting, and they can spend 3 hours performing at the top of their game, sometimes literally, and then turn around and do it again and again and again and again and again. And I would argue that while there are blockers to things that, high levels of performance, and I can talk about what some of those are if you're interested, what I find is that those are actually pretty straightforward to get after for most people. The 3 legs of the stool are sleep, stress, and attention. If your executive function is dialed in, your sleep is dialed in, and your stress response across different features are dialed in, then really we're talking about looking at, well, other limits and things like, I don't know, speed of processing for sort of native raw IQ power, or impulsivity, which is really the executive function stuff, is a big piece of it. So as you dial those things in, what really ends up being the next step is, how do we grade performance? What does it look like? And it can be really variable for somebody who's doing, competitive sailing or competitive aerobatics, which is like taking a biplane through acrobatic maneuvers in the sky. I have a client like that who's been talking about his experiences with us, to somebody who's, performing in a MMA fight or on stage. It's extremely intense, and people have to perform at a very, very high level, very narrow level of high performance. And it's different performance for each of them. And yet, for every one of those people, it's about being able to control what mode you're in with some reliability. So you're not being pushed around by failures in resource, or protecting resources, or pinching up of your resources as the world exceeds the demand that you can bring to bear. That's my general high-level answer on that, I think, Ryan. So I have other more narrow answers if you want them. Radar is asking, why do some people do alpha theta at PZ and FC? I think because they're making a mistake. I think PZ is fine, but FC is a bad idea. I think you never want to do theta rewards anywhere in the frontal lobe at all. It's a bad idea. It creates ab reactions. This is why people get ab reactions from the tag sync protocols sometimes, because frontal sites are used. The alpha theta is not a frontal protocol, full stop. It's about the tissues that shut off when you close the eyes to some extent. They're invoked by alpha theta, and that does not happen with the eyes open. You don't need to shut off. You don't want to shut off the frontal lobe, generally. So, why do I prefer C4A1 over C4A2? Radar asks. I don't. In fact, I'm going to do tonight a C4A2. Oh, did I leave it? Yeah. It says A2 for the next segment. So I prefer whatever works for the person. And you can see sometimes in the QEEG, you can also get a sense from the person. Like if they're really black and foul in their mood, C4A2 might be more activating, more right hemisphere dominant. So maybe C4A1 is softer. I also spend more time probably tuning the frequency, figuring out what reward frequency works. And once you know what that is at C4A1, you can use C4A2 with more impunity, because you're going to get better effects, and you can adjust the protocols once you know how the person's built a bit better. So I use both C4A and C4A1 and C4A2 both. Yeah. Ryan's asking, do I foresee eager getting phased out eventually, or will that remain the best option for a long time? What about someone coming in and developing an app for phones, tablets, etc.? Would this be hard to make? It's a great question. I don't think that eager will get supplanted full stop in the clinical environment that it's used in. I also think that a really easy to use system on a phone is a ways away, because of how difficult it is to get real-time signals off of devices. You need a lot of pretty low-level hardware access, and phones are still a little bit limited in that way. And the field's tried for years, ever since Bluetooth came out, to have Bluetooth training amps, and they really create problems and or drop the training effect out. So I don't think we're gonna get phone and tablet-based devices, but I do think we're going to get other software devices. Eager is, I still think, the cutting edge. It's the best software in terms of impact. Lots of other vendors have run further with developing more interfaces and metaphors for training and better visuals in some of the games, or some of the feedback. I'm thinking of things like Brain Avatar, for instance, for getting visualizations. Or some of the Loretta training that has great visualizations, or tracked, imaging kind of metaphors. So eager is right up there with the best efficacy for traditional neurofeedback, but I do think we are rapidly coming to a place where monolithic, expensive software might go away. And I was able to very quickly build out some HEG software that I'm going to release later this year. It's not quite done yet, mostly because I am working on other things that are probably more important. But I got HEG software running sufficiently to replace our use of BioExplorer in about a month of development time. and it's about 80% of the way there. So I'll finish it off and I'll release the HEG software, and then I'll probably start implementing EEG, because why not? And if that's the case, then I'll offer some, lower cost software than Eager. But the problem is this is a niche industry, and not everyone has a use for Eager, has a desire to do neurofeedback. And so, generously, the whole field doesn't have 15,000 people in it. I just spent the past couple of months building a directory for the field. I'm putting the wire on CZ now in the Vertex, and I'm just being sloppy and just moving the wire without doing anything else beyond putting a little more paste on it. You can see all the noise that's building up in the screen. That should go away now. There it is. So there's probably 5 or 6 big software packages out there between Eager and Brainmaster and what used to be J&J, Thought Technology, Infinity. NeuroGuide has training systems built in. There's a bunch of others. I think NewMind has their own software. I think Nirvana has their software. There's a bunch. But the hole in the marketplace is in the sort of sub $1,000 range. We talk about things like BioEra and BioExplorer being in that range, but they're really hard to use. And the hard problem in neurofeedback is not setting up software; it's knowing what to do with it. So I'm trying to come up with a comprehensive system with a training tracker, a sort of fitness tracker for the brain on one side, and training software on the other. Let me change my session over. So I'm going to do function F5 to change to the next. There it is. Now it says C4A2. I'm going to hit F11 to auto scale everything. That's F12. It's F11. There we go. And then F5 again to start it. Cool. So now I'm training C4 minus A2. And so you can see I'm training 11.75 now. And whenever that, I'm making 8.5 microvolts of SMR. Whenever that stays above the 7.63, you're above threshold. That's what I was talking about at the start of the live stream, that every 30 seconds or so I'll adjust. What that's doing is adjusting the 7.68 or 63 as a percentage. Right now you can see my percentage is 74, and it adjusted. Now it's 66%. The threshold moved to 8.5 because I was making a lot more beta. And so it made it harder, basically. And then the game slowed down at the same time. So there's training happening in real time. So yeah, Ryan, there's definitely something coming. It would not be that hard to make, and with modern development, it's not easy to make. It's a bit of a non-trivial piece of software, even though it's pretty simple. This sort of metaphor or the way of training the brain, because several parts of it have to be highly performant and have very, very low jitter, have real-time timing. I really do think that's possible nowadays using actually modern tools. I'm looking at building filters or signal processing libraries in Rust, because up until now, the real way to do it is to build them in C. And that's what Eager does. It builds a lot of its filters and libraries in C and then hands off to Python for the games mostly and for the display. That's a bit too low level for me, but I'm using some Rust to see about building filters now. And if that works out pretty well, I'll be able to have a desktop-based piece of software to do some EEG. Now, it won't compete with Eager because it'll be much lower level. But again, conservatively across the entire field, there's maybe 15,000 people. And I think it's truly more about like maybe 3,000 to 5,000 that are professionals. So that's a hard space to invest development money into if you're not someone like me that has, hundreds of clients to support with the software. Most people buy 2 or 3 copies of software and they're done buying their software. So, it's a bit of a difficult problem for software access when you're in a niche. Let's see. Hi, Sonia. Evening. Yes, when brainwaves are modified through neurofeedback as intended, are the associated symptoms necessarily affected directly? No. There's a question, right? Where is what you're training important to the goal? You hope it is. You think it is. You're trying to train to get the effect in the goal, be it suffering or performance. And you can usually design the protocol with some certainty, some confidence rather, that you're going to impact the goal you're going after. For a lot of things we do, we know how to do it. And it's pretty well understood, what to do to get somebody what they're looking for. Other times you don't know. Maybe a third of the time, you're not exactly sure what's going to happen. And you have to listen very carefully to what the person says about the experience of the training, and then use that to refine your perspective on what their brain might need. And by doing that, you can iterate to get to better symptom response, if you will. And you may have very subtly different approaches, different frequencies that are slightly, or references. But by listening to the person after a session, you can dial it in, so to speak, towards what they need. And then you're not training the data itself, you're training towards the person's goals. And if you iterate based on that experience, generally you get both things. You get a positive subjective experience over time, and you see that as a changed response in the brain, the resting EEG after you go look again. But yeah, you don't want to train the EEG without adjusting throughout the week based on the person's feedback. And that's actually really important. And a lack of feedback from the person, what they're experiencing, can take the whole process and throw it off. So you just don't get the effects you're looking for if you're training without getting an adjusted feedback process. So yeah, it's very, very important. Great question, Celia. Thank you. Ilya. Hello, Ilya. You're up late. So a C4A2 EEG segment can potentially be too pushy when there is already excessive affect. Not excessive affect, but negative affect. If you have a negativity bias, if you're depressive, if you're angry, if you have a right hemisphere, that right dominant stuff, the Richie Davidson frontal asymmetry thing. If you see a frontal asymmetry, don't do C4A2. You're likely to screw up the right front by bringing up beta broadly. You're not screw it up, but irritate the person. You'll often find that C4A2 runs at a slightly slower hertz within one person than C4 minus A1 does for some reason. Maybe it's because the whole left hemisphere is running faster and we're tapping into some left hemisphere, right? Not sure. But yes, there's a negative affect that can be brought up, the right front especially. Now, it's usually more interior than C4, but you're bringing up some regional power, and so you have to be somewhat cautious in the C4A2, yeah. Ryan's asking, with regards to talking about fine-tune the frequency, can I clarify what I specifically see and look for, what to determine what? Yes, great question. For example, on yourself, 12 to 15 seem to be a bit too activating, stimulating, but 11.75 to 14.75 feels a little too slowing sometimes. Oh, so a couple things on that before I dig into what I generally see. One, the fact that you can feel a quarter hertz difference is cool. Not everyone can. I'm going to pause here. Let me change the over to C4A2. So I'm changing the reference in the ground. I'm going to swap them in the amp, and that will make it an A2 instead of an A1 on my head. That's the easiest way to do that. And then I'm going to move the wire over to C4 minus A2. So Ryan, the fact that you can feel a quarter hertz is pretty awesome. Not everyone can. It's actually, it's actually kind of unusual. I'd say maybe one person out of 10 can feel a very fine-grained adjustment. But what you might want to do, Ryan, is split the difference. You can do 11.875 and 14.87. 875, 825. I think it's 825, right? Instead of a quarter hertz, it's an eighth of a hertz. I forget what it is, but it should be turned on eager for you. And if not, you can go into the preferences and enable the eighth of a hertz. So for you, Ryan, I would say that just split the difference. That's valid. That's valuable. And if you're noticing 11.75 might drag you down and 12 feels too pushy, split the difference. Do the eighth of a hertz up from 11.75. I bet you enjoy that. That's how you know. If you feel it, that's how you know. You feel too downregulated or slowed down with a 0.75 or a 0.5, you feel too pushed by a 12. That's exactly how. And so the way you find it is you start on the SMRs, the C4s and the CZs, sometimes C3, but not as much. And you evaluate how the person feels after. The first thing you said is the first thing we observe. The next thing would be something like sleep or attention. So when training, you'll get 2 or 3 different effects. Here, let me start my session. F11. There we go. F5. Oh, sorry. F11. That's 12. 11. F5. Cool. So now I'm doing CZ minus A1. And I'm doing 11 and a half hertz SMR. When at C4A2, I was doing 11.75. And that's because I know that my brain works that way, and that's why I'm doing this step down. But for many people, this would be a pretty classic way to step down the frequencies. So aside from feeling it right afterwards, you'll get a couple things. Now, the within session or even immediately after effects will last about 2 hours when you feel them, which isn't strong and isn't for everyone. But there's about a 2-hour window of an immediate training effect that happens from within the session all the way through about 2 hours later. Then there's a second time window that's about 24 hours. And over that time window, you will get changes in sleep or subtle like shifts here and there from the training that you did, noticing some stuff here and there. Some calmness, some focus, some tiredness, just little waves of it here and there, not dramatic usually. And then it usually wears off unless you're repeating the protocol. And then it builds up and makes change. So in SMR, if you undertrain, if you undershoot someone's SMR, they'll be very calm, but they'll actually have trouble falling asleep. And if you overshoot someone's SMR, they'll have trouble falling asleep. So sleep onset becomes a big piece of it. And then you have sleep maintenance. If they wake up extra throughout the night, you actually down-regulated them too much. You undershot as well. Now, that's often more at C3, but it can be at CZ as well. So if you do 11 and a half hertz reward and someone reports waking up all night long, they probably needed 12 hertz CZ. So that's one way you can do it, is watching the impacts on sleep especially, because remember, SMR is also called sleep spindles. And once you find the SMR frequency on the SM strip, then you can sort of figure out other beta waves that you may want to adjust. Although you can also look at the QEEG, that page that shows the peak alpha frequency, not the Z-score, but the raw number, and see how below 10 hertz somebody is in their alpha at PZ with the eyes closed. PZLE, PZ linked ears, eyes closed. How much below 10 hertz is the alpha? Now that might be from fatigue, so you might not want to adjust all the way down to that. But if someone's got a slowed alpha or a sped up alpha at PZ, that might tell you that their alpha training, their alpha speed, is actually different. And then instead of doing 6.5 rewards or 7 rewards, you do 7.5 or 8 hertz rewards. And you would adjust the beta wave frequencies that are right around the alpha just a bit less than you adjust the alpha. So if you adjust the alpha by 0.5 hertz to get to the sweet spot, both from the data and from feeling it, then maybe you're going to adjust the SMR or the low beta by 0.25 hertz. And then you have to also think about the fact that once you index the person's individualized optimal response to SMR on the motor strip, on the SM strip, you've also got regional differences. So the right hemisphere is slower than the left. The back is slower than the front. So as you move left and as you move front, things go up in speed, things increase. So you have to sort of index this against one person's brain, goals, style. You know, if they're super anxious, they're probably not going to need to be pushed super fast, right? If they're really tired all the time, they might need to be pushed a little faster. And with that perspective, you can then, approach things strategically with an informed model. Here's their brain, here's their goals, here's their style of goals and suffering. And that'll get you pretty close. And then shifts in how you feel after, how your sleep is, how you are the next day, will then give the provider a sense of how to tune those frequencies. So this is the old school arousal model. It's what I would call the first Othmer model. It's before the Signet days, before the InfraSlow days, back when everything was laterality and arousal model. And that's still the field. Half the field is still this phenotype model, is really the arousal model in some ways. All right, that was a long answer. I hope it was useful. Let's see. More questions. Hi, Jody. Nice to see you. Do all 2-channel amps, i.e. NewMind, work similar to the Eager amps? Seems NewMind software usually directs ground near PZ and utilizes A1 and A2 for most protocols. Yeah, the way NewMind is set up within the software is a limit of the software, not of the amps. I mean, I'm using a UWiz right here, which is a regular This is a 4-channel UWIS, but I could use a 2-channel variant. I've also got this is a Neurobit Optima, which is one of the other amps we use. This happens to be a 2-channel, right? Yeah, it's a 2-channel Neurobit Optima. These work fine. And in most systems, you don't have to match the hardware and the software unless the provider makes both. So in a BrainMaster system, you use BrainMaster software and BrainMaster hardware. It's kind of like Apple in that way, or at least how Apple used to be. But in Eager, it's a lot closer to Windows, where you buy the Eager and you buy the amp and you wed them. And Eager supports a whole bunch of amps. And that's not always true. Most of the vendor-supplied software amp providers out there in the US also make their own software, and they don't support other amps. And so Eager uses regular old prosumer level amps, referential bipolar montage amps, basically. And that is what most people in the field use. So, I grew up in the field using Eager with Thought Technology ProComp amps. The ProComp Infinity, the ProComp, I think 8 Plus amps. Those are great amps. There's somebody on Reddit right now selling one of those amps, actually. So if you're looking for a really good package, it might even come with the Thought Technology software package, which is pretty good too. The old J&J, I think. Doesn't really matter what amp you use as long as your software supports it. But Eager, supports lots of amps, and NewMind is a pretty limited system. And then the setup of protocols in NewMind is actually the issue. It's not the amplifier at all. The amp couldn't care less. The amp's just measuring electricity. Let me go back in and take the wires off. Yes, Radar, please share the Neurofeedback Discord link in here. There's a couple of resources, guys, that people who hang out on this live stream are often at. One of those is the Reddit channel for Neurofeedback, our Neurofeedback, the subreddit. And the other is a Discord channel with sometimes 70, 80 people on it chatting. And half of them are actually active every day. So it's not a super active Discord, not super overwhelming, but there's sections on software development. There's sections on hardware. There's people talking about their own self-training and trying to help each other develop protocols. There's folks arguing with AI about protocol development. There's lots there. So please, Radar, go ahead and share that invite if you would. And I'll pin it as well in the show notes once we're done with the live stream, tomorrow or something, when I edit the live stream to clean up the end cards and things. I will add the note to that. Let's see. Do I still have? I do. Give me a second to clean up here. Sonia's asking, regarding speaking about adjusting protocols based on the person's symptoms during neurofeedback, how often do I recommend supervising the protocol at use? Once a month, for example? Oh gosh, no. Much more. You have to change protocols a lot. This is the problem in neurofeedback, and it's also why I have a job doing neurofeedback, is because it's a skill. You have to iterate every couple of sessions sometimes, maybe one session based on what happens. And you have to really, really, really quickly jump on things. And you cannot tolerate pushing somebody in the wrong direction. If you did it 5-10 times, you would create more of a long-term change. And that is really problematic. So no, once a month is absolutely not appropriate to get a protocol adjustment. And this is my big issue with with those supervisor programs out there, where people will meet with their provider, their supervisor, once a month. And I see it on Reddit. I mean, go to Reddit right now. There's at least 2 people saying, oh, I have a question about my neurofeedback practice and I'm not going to see my supervisor for a month. It's like, well, then you shouldn't be doing neurofeedback if you don't have somebody you can call up and get real-time mentoring from. More traditional neurofeedback mentoring is you have somebody who's better at it and has done it longer than you have, who's a little bit more experienced in everything you might want to do. Or you have multiple people like that. Maybe you sign up for Jen Kunkelman's ongoing weekly sort of grand rounds he does. Maybe you take ongoing classes and get lots of mentors. You can do the School of Neurotherapy with the Thompsons, and you can do the IQCB with the QEEG certification group. You can do all kinds of things, but getting ongoing adjustment to neurofeedback is what neurofeedback is. It's not medicine. It's not a prescription. It's not a best way to go after a particular goal necessarily. Yes, you have to understand the brain deeply, and there are better ways to understand the brain. looking at raw data is necessary, not just the QEEG flat maps. Somebody on Reddit recently was like, I didn't have good results, and it's because Andrew doesn't look at EEG. No, I don't teach every client to look at raw EEG, but I look at raw EEG with every single person, and I do get good results with most people. But people are variable, and how people feel from training can be really variable. So it isn't, unfortunately, a perfect practice, even when we bring those skills to bear. But the iterative nature is sort of the bread and butter of neurofeedback, and that's actually what I'm building first in software, is a reporting interface where people should be able to log their sleep, their stress, their mood, their attention every day with low friction, and the provider should be able to see the trends of change of those things against the neurofeedback protocols, the meditation, the sleep habits, etc. All those things changing, and then that will help the provider get much closer to the information they need to make proper guidance decisions, to help the person then see the trends happening. So that's actually the hard part of neurofeedback, is the client understanding day to day what the through line is, and the clinician understanding day to day what the client's experience is. And then those two things have to be sort of pointed in the same direction to get the good effects. So I'm building something to try to make the clinical practice a lot easier, but it's actually an iterative practice like personal training. It is not an assignment of protocols that you do once a month, sadly. So that's too much of a shortcut. PNQ, hello PNQ, is asking, how do you find PZ on your head? Not that hard. There's a few ways to find it. If you have a big flat spot kind of back here, it's in the middle of it, almost always. The more precise way to find it, using bone landmarks. You find the auricular notch, and you go up to the vertex, and that's CZ, right? CZ, central zenith. You also find the occipital bump in the back and go up an inch, and that's OZ. So at this point, you're about that far apart. You split the difference, and you're on PZ. So halfway between CZ and OZ is PZ. That's it. So it's pretty easy. I will also say that being a little bit up or down on PZ is pretty forgiving. Just don't be left or right of it if you're trying to hit PZ. Thank you, Sonia. I think that software would be wonderful. I will share. I don't know if you're a Peak Brain client, but either way, I'll share it with a bunch of people for testing purposes when it's out later this year. I skipped something. PNQ. Where is the inion? The inion is that notch under the occipital bump. If you have a bump there in the back of your head, little knob all the way at the back, at the base of the skull, that's the occipital ridge or occipital bump. Under that is the inion. And so just above that, about an inch, is OZ. So OZ is the tip of the occipital lobe, and the inion is basically just under the edge, the lower edge of the brain in theory. So, cool guys. Well, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. We spent a good hour chatting and doing neurofeedback. And I didn't even have to prepare, so you made it really easy for me. Thanks. I hope it was useful. We got into some protocol discussions. We talked about my favorite protocol, which my shorthand in my notes says LR2C, left, right, 2, center. And that's C3-A1, C4-A2, and CZ-A1, a beta followed by 2 variants of SMR. So if you would like to do some neurofeedback, come find us. We're having some June specials, both for new clients and renewals. You can hit me up on the Peak Brain Institute website if you're curious what that is. Our coaches will respond to the chat requests if you have any questions. And we have some deals again for new clients for brain mapping. If you're watching this video, you can get a brain map done for $250 in any of our offices, which is about the best deal in the world because it not only covers your first brain map, it covers repeats without charge for the year. So we have the world's most accessible fee structure for getting brain maps done. And even better, I teach you to read them. We spend at least a couple of consults during that year helping you look at data, read the attention testing, read the flat maps. And if you want to, I'll open the raw data with you and go through that as well. I'll teach you to go over Loretta and do 3-dimensional visualization, all kinds of cool stuff you can do with brain mapping. So take your time and dig into your brain, folks, but I encourage everyone to develop agency and find your way of understanding yourself. So, folks, until next week, I think I'm going to end here. Have a lovely evening, and I hope you're taking great care of your brains. Do me a favor before you leave, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want notifications, tap that little bell and it will alert you when I'm going online. And if you have any questions or things that you want to share with me, please leave questions. I tend to come back and answer them all when I can. And you are all welcome, especially you, Jody, for thanks. And I will talk to you guys.